young people of color into therapy. And besides just doing therapy sessions, we actually go out into the community and partner with schools, small organizations, and organizations centered on helping people. We go into those schools and organizations and do workshops with them as well. We Throughout those workshops, we try to learn those organizations and practice cultural competence throughout learning. So we get feedback from those organizations. We try to incorporate as much creativity into our workshops and teaching mental health as possible. So our last partnership we did with Jonesboro High School was we got with the students and did a mental health kind of field day for them. So we incorporated different types of therapy like CBT and dialectical behavioral therapy, and we turned those into games to teach the students about their mental health. The first one we did was a mental health relay race where they had little negative thoughts on their note cards, and the second person in the relay race had to run up to them and say something the opposite to get them in the habit of combating their negative thoughts and combating things like burnout. So I'm excited to talk with you guys today more about greater change and burnout and purpose.
Awesome. So, as you all can hear, we got a lot of amazing people on the panel and just some awesome wisdom that I think is going to come from this conversation. I know these three things that we're talking about tonight may not seem connected, but they definitely are connected, right? So, Maureen, I want to start with you. From your experience as a leadership and wellness coach, what are some of the early signs of burnout that a young professional might overlook?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, just what you just said made me think one of the first signs is you feel like you don't have a purpose. You're not motivated. Why am I going to this place every day? Those kind of things. Some other things, and it can get tricky, particularly this time of year around the holiday season, end of the year. We kind of all feel like we're maybe on the edge or past the edge. So if you feel overwhelmed, you feel unmotivated, you're irritable. Um, my daughter would tell you that's a clear sign for me. I'm a little cranky. That's a sign. And especially when it's minor things that set you off, right? It's usually a clue that things have built, and then that one little thing sets you off. You're past your change limit. If you're isolating yourself socially, if you're procrastinating, procrastination is almost always about anxiety, and there's a lot usually there too related to burnout. If you're leaning into unhealthy coping mechanisms, and that can be lots of different things, right? That can be overeating, eating unhealthy, binging TV, doom scrolling on the phone for hours on end, all kind of things, right? So if you're using unhealthy coping mechanisms, if you're having sleep issues, you're really tired, and sleep issues can look different. For some people, they sleep too much and they're still tired. For some people, they don't sleep enough, and then of course they're tired. And for some people, they sleep. They're like, "Well, I slept 7 or 8 hours, but I still feel tired." You're not resting. Um, if you have trouble focusing, and then lastly, if we listen to our bodies usually tell us long before we kind of clue in mentally in our thoughts. Most of us are walking around with our shoulders up and our jaw clenched. So like right now, just like do that for yourself if you're doing that, right? Do you have aches and pains that have no rhyme or reason? Um, those kind of things, headaches, insomnia. So those are some initial things that come to mind. Or people might, also say like, "Hey, what's going on with you? You don't seem like yourself."
Yeah, I think it's important. I always tell people do body scans like to check where you are. Amari, I want to toss this to you because you just told us, yeah.
Guess what I kind of wanted to add to that.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Go ahead.
Signs of burnout. One big one for me is getting through my day and not really remembering what I was doing. And I feel like with that, there's just a lack of intentionality throughout your day. Just going through the motions is a really big sign of burnout for me. And that means I really need to reassess what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, etc. But
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Let's just do this. Yeah, so like I do a lot of work on burnout and moral injury for health professionals, as well as other professionals and businesses like business and nonprofit. And let me like just divide these three things up because I think it's like really important to think about what the symptoms are and what like the difficulty is, right? So there's certain types of burnout which is almost like a temporary burnout, like seasonal, or like we're tired but we're not looking for like a big career change, right? Or we're not looking for a life change. Like that type of burnout is, I mean, very similar to other types, but it's like you just don't have the gas in the tank. And then you have to start thinking about whether you're doom scrolling or not sleeping and stuff like that. Like, am I making those choices because I'm trying to find ways to relax or find ways to fill my tank and they're just ineffective ways? Or am I trying to do that because I'm distracted or trying to distract myself from what's really like bothering me? And like, it's easier to doom scroll than like do the work of why is this not working for me right now? Then there's like that larger form of burnout, which is um, similar. And like, I don't have the energy anymore, but I don't have the energy anymore because I don't think what I'm doing is worth it anymore. Right? Like that's a different type of burnout. Like that type of burnout is not how do I gain more energy, but it's why am I no longer motivated to continue this path that I used to be on? That is like has different answers and different even questions in terms of the self-reflection of it. Then there's a type of moral injury that people talk about, which is very different. The moral injury isn't about like, I don't have the reserves anymore, but it's the work that I'm doing almost transgresses my sense of identity. Like I'm being asked to do something that speaks against who I am, what I believe, and what I care about. And that also has different questions to ask and different answers to solve. So when you think about these three different things, like it's not simply enough about like what the symptoms are, but what do those symptoms say about the condition that is causing those symptoms? So.
No, that's really, really good. Sorry, I was writing down notes. Yeah. Yeah, I think that oftentimes we're not paying attention to ourselves. And a question that I usually tell students is, what is causing you to disconnect from your body? Right. So to do the deep work of why am I not feeling connected? So that's kind of what I'm hearing all three of you say. Amari, I kind of want to talk about some of the work that Greater Change is doing. So if you can walk me through, how does Greater Change approach the issue of cultural competence in mental health care, especially when it comes to recognizing and treating burnout in diverse communities?
The initial purpose for Greater Change was for it to be a mental health resource for young minorities, because a lot of the times mental illness and mental decline, like burnout and lack of purpose, show up differently in minority students, especially young minority adults. And that's because we were a lot of time raised differently and have different values and different cultural practices. And with that, Greater Change, unlike most therapy services, goes into our communities, and we do, again, these workshops that I keep talking about. With the workshops, we get feedback from these diverse communities, and that's how we usually address our cultural competence, through the conversations we have, through the organizations that we partner with, like Gigi's House, which is a sexual assault prevention and housing agency in Atlanta, or schools like, again, Jonesboro High School or Atlanta International School. Practicing with diverse populations is how we maintain currency and cultural competence. And then on an individual level, with our therapists that we hire, we try to hire people from more diverse counseling programs, if that makes sense. So like Howard University or UC Berkeley or Texas A&M, counseling programs with diverse student bodies, because at the end of the day, that's what you want in a therapist. You want a therapist that can talk to you and give you guidance, regardless of what you look like, what you sound like, how you speak. You know, you want someone that at the end of the day understands you. So if I had to give any advice from that, is to try to find someone, doesn't even always have to be a therapist, but someone that you have something in common with, to just talk to and practice mental health, practice reflection and getting to know yourself.
I think your work is going to be even more critical in the climate kind of that we're in. Like we have students, especially who are going to college, but their whole lives has been, shooter drills. Like there's the stress of that. Like, and so just thinking about all the things that contribute to mental health plus your own personal, so I think getting students, especially to identify emotions and being able to do that is very important and critical work for sure. So Ira, I have a question for you. Don't be nervous. If you could explain to us like how ethical leadership and values-driven decision-making play a role in addressing burnout at an organizational level. So we kind of talked about burnout kind of independently. What does that look like if we are part of an organization? What does ethical leadership need to do? What does that look like?
Right. I mean, that's a big question because there are a lot of words that need parsing out, but I'll do it quickly because we're not going to be here all night, unless you guys want to be here all night. So let me first talk about what ethics is in terms of ethical leadership. So as an ethicist, sometimes I'll walk into a room and people are like, I don't need you and I don't want you. Because what they think is, they think, well, they'll say about them, not about me. They'll say, I'm a good person. I don't need you to tell me what to do or what's right and what's good. Like, they get very defensive. Or they'll say, in terms of cultural competence, they'll say, you don't know me. How do you think you could speak for me? Right? And I'm like, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's not what an ethicist should do. That's just a jerk. So what I do as an ethicist, I say, I don't want to tell you what to do. What I'm looking to do is I'm trying to help you think through how to act with integrity. And what that means is, do you understand what your goals are? Do you understand what your values are? Do you understand what your expectations or your habits and your actions are not only what they mean for you, but what they communicate to others as well, right? So on an organizational side, that's looking at like, what's a company's mission? What's their vision? What are their values? What are their policies? What are their procedures? Like, how do leaders communicate that through so that there's a sense of not only transparency of what we're about, but a sense of belongingness. Like when I talk about the value of respect, you know what I'm talking about because it's like talks about what we believe in, what behaviors respect entails, and what questions we ask to make sure we can act on that value as opposed to just say, oh yeah, no, this is a respect thing, right? So when I think about ethical leadership, right, it's not really about like a top-down command type of directive, but it's about like creating the atmosphere that doesn't ask people to comply, but asks people to participate, right? So when you think about it that way, right, when people are working for a company that they know what the values are, not only because they're on a wall, but because they're in decisions, they're in explanations of decisions. People understand what the mission and the vision is, not because like a new guy came in and this is what he wants, but this speaks to what we're trying to accomplish as a business community or as a business organization. And when I can like speak to my challenges as an employee or speak to my difficulties, we have a common language because I don't have to say, I want this, but I can say, we want this because I know what you stand for and I know why you hired me. Like that type of transparency and value speak like allows for burnout to be mitigated. Because if you think about what the burnout is, especially the second one, which is I don't feel like I have meaning in my job, efficacy in my job, validation or recognition in the work that I'm doing, and my ambition is thwarted because no one's seeing me, right? Then like, of course you have burnout and of course you're leaving, right? But all of those things are not burnout issues. That's like company culture, right? So that's how ethical leadership plays a role. It opens the avenues for people to do what they're set out to do and feel a sense of mattering in their work, right? Like you can work hard and not be burnt out. You can barely work and feel burnt out. So it's not simply about energy, but it's about the force of that energy.
That's good. The director of career services in me wants to follow up on that, but I'm going to come back to that question. This question actually is for all of you. Burnout often can leave people feeling disconnected from their sense of purpose, kind of what you're just saying. And so we can recognize that we're disconnected, but give us some advice of like how we get reconnected to like what truly matters, both in our professional lives and our personal life. So whoever wants to take that, Marie, go first.
Well, first is stop thinking of professional and personal as separate. You're one person. We could try to do this compartmentalization thing, but It's not really working, just like multitasking. We like to think we're good at it. Studies show we're not. Our brain's not built that way. So that's step one. Step two is being willing. Our brains want a quick fix. Resist that impulse and take the time to have some self-reflection, introspection. And that looks different for different people as to what mechanisms might help you, but be willing to do that work because it is work. And a big piece of that work, Ira was touching on just a few minutes ago, is around values. I work with individuals, even individuals within companies, and they can tell you what the mission, vision, values of the company they work for are, but they don't know their own. And so be willing to figure out what your values are, not what they should be, not what your parents told you they should be or your culture told you they should be, but what they actually are. And a lot of people don't know what that is when you sit down and have the piece of paper, like, I don't know. I tell people to reflect on when are the moments, the people, the circumstances that anger you, that frustrate you, that disappoint you. Those kind of places where you get agitated and fired up in response, that's your values. Not what they should be. That's what they are.
You can go first or? You want it?
Yeah.
I'll go after.
The number one piece of advice that I can give for getting to reconnect with yourself is the same way that you would connect with anyone, is to just talk to yourself. That's the number one thing that I feel like I can say. The more that you talk to yourself, the more that you get to know yourself, the more that you get to understand what you want and who you are. Just the same way you get to know your best friend or your family. You do that by talking to them constantly. You get to know what they feel like their purpose is. You get to know their values. So do that with yourself. And I don't mean going out in public and mumbling to yourself. I mean, you can start with something small like, do I want today to be a good day? And then from there, that question evolves into something like, how am I going to make today a good day? How do I want my day to look? What do I want to do today? Why do I want to do that? And once you get to asking those questions, you'll get more intentionality in your life. And intention is, the biggest part of mental health for me, because I feel like that is a big part of avoiding burnout. When you go through life with intention, you can avoid getting somewhere that you don't want to be, getting burnt out, getting unfulfilled. That makes sense.
I will say my personal mantra when it comes to values, and the mantra I make everyone else repeat over and over again, is values entail choices. And what I mean by that is typically if you think about values as things on a wall that you either aspire to have or you have to comply to, then you'll say, oh, I can't do that because I value this, or I have to do that because I value that. And that's weak. Like, you don't, to say, if someone told me I can't do something, I'm gonna be like, challenge accepted. Like, let me see if you actually won't do that. If someone says I have to do that, I'm like, oh, you're not gonna do that well because you feel like you have to. Right? But if values are things you value, which means things you care about, own it. It's empowering that way. Like, what's worse? Like having a value that you can't act on, or like not having values that you care about at all. Right? So like if values entail choices, then choose accordingly. And if you do that, then it helps with confidence. It helps with efficacy. It helps with the ability to communicate that, because it's not like, oh, we're all supposed to value this, so let's find a way to like justify based on something we don't, right? But if it's like, no, like I actually really care about this, and let me tell you all the reasons why, because I know myself, I talk to myself, you step forward with a strong step, and that's really important.
Add one more thing before.
Sure.
So we talked about values a lot. Another thing that can be, two things actually that can be helpful with reconnecting with yourself, because sometimes we do get so disconnected, we don't know what's our true voice anymore, or we might have been in a relationship that's made us doubt ourselves on a very kind of existential level. Talk to people that you trust. Ask them, who would you say that I am? Who do you know me to be? What's my brand, for those in the corporate speak, right? So lean into those relationships and ask those questions of them too. And then finally, I think we can't underscore the importance of rest enough, and I don't just mean sleep, that's one type of rest. Some say there's 7, some say there's 9, it's debatable, but think about the different types of rest: psychological rest, stimulation rest, right? Like, we're all constantly combating the thing, so think about getting the rest you need so that you can hear that true self again.
Yeah, that immediately came up. So I'm glad you brought up rest, because I think with how busy our lives are, it's hard to sometimes prioritize rest, and not just the physical aspect of rest, like mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So we don't get to that point of burnout. And so I think that really speaks to self-reflection. And that's kind of what I heard between Omari and Maureen, is you need to be able to sit with yourself. But I feel like that sounds easier than what it what it really is. So if you kind of give us some tips, and this for all three, if you kind of give us some tips on what does it really mean to sit with yourself? What are some ways that you've seen have worked for some folks, maybe that works for you, to just kind of get back into alignment? I know you were saying talk to yourself, but some people are like, I may not feel comfortable with that. Like, how does that manifest in other ways? Like, is it writing or whatever the tip is? But what are some like actionable things that we can do for people who may feel a little lost in trying to really center themselves and sit with themselves?
I'll give you things that probably aren't heard that often. I actually recommend learning to sit in discomfort. Like it's a really hard thing to do, and it's a really good skill to develop. Talking to yourself, reflecting, journaling, all that stuff. You may do well, but you'll only continue doing it as long as you're enjoying it. And when it gets hard, you'll move to something else. But if you learn how to sit in difficulty, whether it's physical discomfort, emotional discomfort, mental discomfort, and so forth, you can extend your attention and your ability even past when it gets hard. And you can stretch yourself to start reflecting on things that you used to shy away from because it was hard, which it wasn't hard. It was just like uncomfortable. So like the transferability of like doing yoga to having a difficult conversation is actually closer than you think. Because like a physical discomfort of like, oh, this posture is really like annoying and hard, to this posture with us talking is really annoying and hard, is actually very close psychologically.
And then to go off of how do you sit with yourself even if you don't want to talk, because talking can be hard. And like Maureen said, you want to take a break from stimulation and things. So sitting with yourself can just look like just that, sitting with yourself and doing nothing. Even if you have to take a bathroom break at work, going to the bathroom, sitting on the toilet and not thinking about anything, taking time for yourself, a break from your day, something that interrupts that just going through the motions, if that's you. Okay, just something to recenter to yourself. That could be going to McDonald's. That could be going on a run with your dog. That could be yoga. That could be, again, or talking, recording yourself, writing, anything, something that you are comfortable with. And then from there, you can build to the self-reflection and talking to yourself and getting help if you need to.
Yeah, two things come to mind to build on that. One is something, actually, two things to build off of you, Amari. One is read the book, The Power of Now. It will really push you. One, I have moments where I'm like, okay, I'm smart. I know what these words mean, but what is he talking about? But it's really about being present. We get so caught up in the past and in the future that we rarely can just sit, like Amari was saying. For me, I grew up in coastal South Carolina, so I think about old people sitting on a porch and they look like they're doing nothing. And I'm like, we don't know how to do that. What's our version of sitting on the porch, right? So find your sitting on the porch. Read the Power of Now if that appeals to you. If you're a book person, find a podcast. There's all the things now, right? Your medium of choice. The other thing I wanted to build on was this talking to yourself notion. It can get us in trouble because our brains are pre-wired for negative and for confirmation. So something happens, you say, I suck, and then something else happens, you're like, see, I told you, you suck. right? And we just kept building that loop over and over, or whatever it is that might have been given to you, some story about yourself from childhood, and things happen, and then you just confirm it over and over and over again because that's the lens you're looking through. You don't see it differently. So, as part of that talking to yourself, getting clear on, and it might sound silly, but we have those kind of different stories or voices internally. Know which ones are sabotaging and learn how to quiet them and lean into the wise ones. And if you need some support figuring that out, their coaches, their therapists, their friends help sort through that. So yeah, so just be cautious with that sabotaging voice that likes to rise up. There's even a little quiz you can do online. What's your saboteur? This researcher that has come up with this work around positive intelligence. So working on your positive intelligence can go a long way.
That's good. Okay, so I want to go back to the question that I had in my brain that I was like, I'm gonna leave that alone, but no, I'm not. Okay. So Ira, you kind of sparked this thought. One thing that I work with students on a lot is workplace environments. And so a person may suspect that their job may be a part of the burnout. What are some warning signs, y'all? Like, what are some things that people going into an organization, or maybe they're already a part of, that are warning signs that they can see in the culture that they know this is not going to be a supportive space for their whole being?
I'll do this. And then you guys can give all the real information. I always look at match quality. Like, so I'll give you a personal example. So I like to break scripts and play it. Like, I'm a jokester and I keep things light. I find it's easier for me to be creative. It's easier for me to think of solutions if I'm not mired down by seriousness, to the point where, like, if people aren't accepting of that, it just does not work, right? But like, I know myself and I know how where, like, in the environments in which I thrive. So if I'm in an environment where it's like, it's not conducive to that, like, I know I'm not going to last long, right? Somebody else might say, well, Ira, that sounds horrible, and I wouldn't want to be in that culture. I want one where expectations are clear, directives are clear. I know what work I need to be done. I don't want to play because that's not what work is about. Then I'd say, great, like, if you know what you want, then know how you're acting within that environment. And if there's no match quality, then you know, like, it's not like, you don't fit. You just don't fit. So that's it's not objective to the environment. It's subjective to how you fit in that environment.
Yeah. And it can change. So you get a
Yeah.
new supervisor and suddenly it's not in alignment anymore. So you have to assess. I saw the amen testimony right there for a second. We've all been there, right? The other thing is going in to an organization. So I do a lot of career coaching, but I could live life never seeing another resume, but it's all right. It's a means to an end. Ask questions. Don't just Google what questions should I ask. Ask questions that matter to you. What are your values? Ask how I value this in a workspace. How does this show up here? I value this in a leader. How do you show up that way or not show up that way? And I remind candidates going through job searches, when you're going through a job search, that's likely the best they're ever going to treat you. They're courting you. And if you feel some kind of way about how that's happening or not happening, that might be your sign that it's not a fit. There's not a match.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
Just because this is hilarious. So I was interviewing for a job once. I'm not going to say where. I'm not going to say this. And they made it like really formal. Like, they kept me in a boardroom, and like, I was in the boardroom the whole time. And different people would come in and like interview and so forth. And I'm like, I want to see the place. Like, they're like, okay, we can give you a formal tour from like 2:30 to 2:50 or whatever. I'm like, no. Like, I want to walk around. I want to talk to like support staff. I want to see who's at the water cooler. Like, I want to see what happens at the elevator. Like, I want to see this place. And they're like, no, that's not how we run these interviews. I'm like, but then I don't believe anything you're telling me because I can't see anything. And they're like, this isn't gonna work. And I'm like, I think you're right. So like, that's something to really think about. Like, it's not simply what people tell you. you got to see body language. You got to see how people pause. What's their affect as they're speaking? Because like that communicates so much more than the formality of the words that they might be using. Yeah.
I want to take a younger approach to everything because I feel like people coming right out of college don't always know exactly what they want to do when they're job searching. They're just trying to do something that feels kind of right. And I kind of want to take an approach that a lot of us have when we're finding food. If it's not a hell yes, then it's a hell no. So a lot of the time we'll be looking for food and we're thinking, oh, do I want this? No. 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 But we finally find something like, oh yeah, I want pizza today. And with that, I feel like a lot of us know what we don't want a lot more and a lot quicker than what we do want. And when you're job searching, you have to not just go for something because maybe you think you'll be okay with it. And like Ira was saying, finding somewhere that you truly think that you can fit in, even if you don't know yourself, find an environment that you feel like you can get to know yourself and that you can come into the person that you want to be.
One last thing for the folks that are there and things change, and the thing that changed might be you. We don't stay the same. Don't be afraid to leave. Go where there is a match. People stay way too long. Don't stay where you're not a fit.
I love that. And when you brought up the interview is probably going to be the best you're treated. Um, Another thing I tell students is you're also interviewing them. Like, come prepared to talk about what is the culture like? What is the environment like? What does professional development look like? Right? Like, are you going to invest in me? Can I work from home remotely? Like, so I can have days where I can breathe. So you're interviewing them just as much. And I think the answers to that, I also like to pay attention to the people who already work there. Like, I can tell if people are dead in the eyes. That means something is off in this space. And that's probably a space that I'm probably don't want to be in. Yeah. So I want to ask this question because there is a lot of content out there around burnout. But what do y'all think is missing? How do you think the conversation is evolving? Like, where would you like to see the cultural conversation go around burnout? What's missing?
This one, I feel like just acknowledgement of mental health. I feel like we're getting there for sure in 2024. We're getting to a point where employers and corporations are understanding that burnout matters. But unfortunately, I feel like that's because of a bit of a pessimistic standpoint. I feel like employers specifically, are getting to a point where they're understanding that when their employees are getting burnt out, that affects the services and goods that they can produce. And that dip in quality to their business is what's making them change. And it might not be for the best reason, but change is coming and occurring. And that looks like policies surrounding taking days off, paid time off, being more lax with when you can call out of work and people being more grounded around that. And at Greater Change, we try to prevent our therapists from getting burnt out by limiting the amount of sessions that they can have a week, limiting their caseload. All the therapists at Greater Change are not allowed to have more than 20 patients a week, and the average is 25 to 30 plus. But once you start to get so high, it starts to affect the quality of care that you can give to each patient. And with that, you can't help as many people, and that's really the goal at the end of the day, to help as many people as possible. So again, just to answer the question again, I think the conversation around burnout is going to change when employers start to see the effects that negative mental health has on their employees and the good that they produce.
As if they see it, because some of them aren't paying attention to it.
I'll go on this one. You know, it's funny when I was asked to do this panel. First, I was like, I don't want to talk about burnout again. I'm like annoyed, and like it's enough. Like, we talk about burnout all the time. So, given that, let me take a history lesson and talk about the origins of positive psychology. So when Martin Seligman was looking at the research that he was doing on learned helplessness and was thinking about like the benefits of psychology, he kept thinking, wow, what we're doing is we're trying to think about how we can get sick people better or normal. Normal is a horrible word, but let's just use it. It was a couple decades ago. He's like, why don't we think about how to get people who are quote unquote normal to flourishing, right? So when he started looking at positive psychology, it wasn't about looking at how to get to some sort of like mean. It was looking at how these therapeutic interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, humanistic therapy, and stuff like that could take people to even better than where they were before. I would love for Burnout to spark a discussion of not how can we get people to not burn out, but are we using the tools like organizational tools, individual tools, personal tools, and so forth, to think not about like the midpoint, but all the way to let people thrive in their work and in their life. Like, let's go all the way with it. That's what I want.
Yeah, and I would add, and I see leaders wanting to do this, but haven't figured out how to do it, particularly in corporate structures. They want to be humane again and see people as humans and not disposable and not, someone we can lay off without thinking twice. And so seeing kindness come back in the workplace and when we care about people and they're thriving and their well-being, um, and I'm a big fan of joy, as you might have guessed, and I want to see joy in the workplace again. And for me, and that's a little different for everyone, but thinking about alignment and integration, where in you and your whole life, personal and professional, can you get 80% of what matters to you most of the time? That match that Ira was talking about. Every day is not going to be a good day. We might even have 4 years that we're like, nah. But when can you get the match most of the time? And again, lean into your power of choice. It's not happening to you, it's happening for you. But you've got to step into it and choose it.
I love that. Something that I heard was use your PTO. Like, don't be afraid to use it. Prepare the others. That's what PTO stands for. Prepare the others, because I'm not going to be there. Yeah, don't be ashamed of that. So I kind of want to round out the panel with opening up the floor to any questions online or in the room. So if anybody has any questions, I don't know if we have a mic that can go around, maybe.
I'll pass it around. I mean, I'll give it to you.
Thanks. Anyone?
Yeah, my name is Amal Modi, and I'm class of 22 business. So thank you all so much. This was great. I was also reluctant to come here because it was about burnout. I was like, hearing more about burnout is just gonna make me even more burnt out. But then Yabi reminded me that there's more about purpose and mental health as well. So I was like, all right, checks out. Ira mentioned something about how the amount of work you do doesn't have much to do with burnout necessarily. You could be doing a lot of work and not be burnt out, and you could be doing the bare minimum and still feel burnt out. So can you tell me a little more, can the panelists in general like elaborate on finding work that you could be doing for many, many hours and time would just pass by and still not feeling burnt out in a way, if that makes sense? I just want to hear more thoughts about like this idea that work is not proportional to burnout.
I think that a big part of it is, and I know it's going to be very hard, especially for our generation, is to not think about it as much, because I feel like we're so focused on what job is going to make me fulfilled. What am I going to do for the rest of my life? What am I going to do with my time that's going to make me money? But when you slow down and just don't really think about it too much, let yourself, I don't know, meander for a little bit, not too much, but let yourself meander and check out jobs, check out some things that you wouldn't have actually thought about, or check out some internships or just any type of job opportunity that might be outside of your normal wheelhouse. You might come to love it, you might come to like it, and you might not. At the end of the day, your job is just that. It is a job. It does not have to be your end all be all. I like to tell people sometimes that you don't have to find a job that makes your whole life. You can find a job that can get you through your life, if that makes sense. Your job can be just that. You can come home to something that's more fulfilling than what makes you money.
I agree with that. I'd also say, I don't know if you've heard about this or read about this, but I always butcher his name, but Michal Csikszentmihalyi talks about the concept of flow. Have you heard about this? No? So flow is really interesting. I mean, he'll call it like an autotelic activity, which like, who knows what that means? I mean, I do because I read the book, but it basically means like something done for its own sake or something that's intrinsically motivating. But like the best way to think about the flow state is, have you ever done something where both time flew and time stopped at the same time? Right? Like that's the type of thing where you're like, oh, I can do that forever. Now that might change, meaning like you could do that forever for like 3 weeks and then do something else, right? But like some people get that when they play video games. Some people do that when they're in the creative arts. Some people do that when they're like doing strategic planning, right? But it speaks to like what you're good at. It's somewhat a little bit more difficult than you want it to be. So it stretches you and you still feel that sense of challenge. You're growing from it. You feel productive in it. You feel like it's worth it somehow, right? Maybe not worth it in terms of like objectively worth it, because people have that sense of flow during playing video games, but like there's something there that keeps you going, right? Like if you can find those, like where you get that sense of flow, then you'll look for it in other places also.
I would agree. And I would add, take that pressure off of work. Your career does not have to be capital C. In our culture, we've made it our identity. Guess what? I work with people at the near the end of their career too, and they're like, "Who am I if I'm not the director of blah 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 at such and such company?" Right? They don't know how to sit on the porch and just chill. So, and again, think holistically. Maybe it is video games for you, where flow is, and you go be director of blah 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 to pay the bills for the video games and the chair and the equipment and the whatever, right? So take the pressure off career being one thing, and despite what they might tell you in college, it's not one thing that you pick forever. The most interesting people have done all kind of interesting things. Think of it as exploration. What do I want to do next? Not for all time. What am I going to do next? Or what am I going to do first? What am I going to do last? Yeah, take the pressure off.
See one more question.
Hi, my name is Moni. So I just wanted to ask, so what if your work environment is conducive to burnout? So it's not necessarily the career, more so that environment. Should we change jobs or should I go to like still work under the same umbrella of that career, just in a different capacity? I work in social work, by the way.
I'll start on this one. Better? Cool. All right. So, and I don't always quote books, but like sometimes they're helpful. So, Jonathan Haidt writes in The Happiness Hypothesis about the difference between a job, a career, and a calling. And he says a job is something that you do and you look at the clock for when it's done, right? A career, you don't necessarily look at the clock. Sometimes you do. You like what you do, but you're looking for the ambition, right? Like you're trying to grow within that career because you want something more, you want something out of it. And a calling is what you do because it speaks to who you are and your place in the world, right? Sometimes like burnout occurs because you have a job that everyone thinks or expects you to have as a calling, or you have a career that has turned into a job because like you've lost that ambition for it, right? So one of the things to think about in social work or in anything else is, are you doing it like at what level of intensity or what level of engagement? Because you can do something hard as a job for a while because you're filling your cup doing something else. But if you're not filling your cup doing something else and it's not actually your calling either, like then you start thinking about what else should I be doing, right?
My answer to that question, I feel like it might be a little simple, but just ask yourself, why am I still working this job? If I'm not happy, if I'm miserable, then why am I still here? And if you have no answer to that question, it might be time to go. It might be time to go explore and figure something else out. Because if it's just the money, other jobs make money. You can make money doing whatever else, just take time to explore. And like she was saying, It's about what you want to do next and where you want to go next, not about what you're doing now.
I- we tend to feel conflicted, or we would have been an easy exit already, right? It wouldn't even be a question. So sorting through that again, what role might the sabotaging voice be playing in how you're thinking? And oftentimes it's hard to sort through that ourselves. So do that with somebody, a friend, a mom, whoever is a confidant, a coach, a therapist. Work through it to figure out what are the real issues for you. Is it the calling issue? Is it the coworkers that you just don't have the same values and it's a constant values conflict? Really get to the source of what the issues are and then make decisions. We tend to wait and wait and wait and wait, and then that one little thing sets us off, and we say take this job and shove it, and then we're like, oh my god, all they did was like, I don't know, something silly, right? But it's because we let it build. So do the work, again, the hard work of sorting through to figure out what the best decision is for you. That's what I would say.
I guess I was just wondering, you used the word calling, Dr. Bedso, and Marielle and I work at Candler. I know Maureen is a Candler grad, and that is all over the place in the School of Theology. What is your calling? It's part of their admission statements. And I had a job that I really felt like was my calling, and it ended kind of unexpectedly. And so I'm just in the stage of really questioning that language and the benefit of that language. And so I appreciated just kind of breaking it down like that, and was wondering if you could just speak more. I don't know if you know about the history, or um, I think it can lead us to burnout, the sense of I have this calling and it has to be this one thing. And I don't know, wanted to bring that word and hear more.
Let's do this because I actually don't like that word, but it was I just gave it because it was Jonathan Haidt's word, and it's good distinction. But let's do the history of it real quick, right? So calling you like as a more recent term, but it has come from vocation and profession, right? So vocation from vocal is also like a calling, but it's a calling that you like from outside that you hear, and it's usually used in religious context. Like I've heard the call, I have a calling, right? Profession also is a type of speech, right? To profess something is to speak it out loud to others, right? But it's an internal call. It's not a call that you hear, right? So it's like professions, which you got to imagine clergy is more of a vocation than a profession, but like it has professional formation to it. But like the traditional professions are like military, medicine, and law, right? And that type of profession is like that community of professionals have something to say about like what they do and what it means in society, right? Professions, like forget vocation, like the less religious our society is, like the less helpful vocation and that type of calling is. But profession is also breaking down because we no longer have these like communities of like the legal profession or the medical profession in such a way that's like a community unto itself in society. Those jobs, professionals, I should say, are becoming much more transaction oriented and being subsumed within more like corporate and other organizational structures. So the whole idea of a calling, whether it's something you hear or something you say, is breaking down by virtue of how we work today, right? So I like to go back to more like can you be purposeful in what you choose, as opposed to like what are you professing by how you're acting, right? Is that helpful?
Thank you. I heard y'all talk about earlier, like values aren't something that values are things you choose. They're not something that is just put up on a wall. So I'm curious, what are some examples of values and how do you embody them? The last bit was just like an add-on, but my main question was, can you give me some examples of values?
I think finding your values kind of goes off of what Maureen was saying is things that when other people do them, it makes you upset. I feel like that's a good way to find your values. So when someone lies to you, dishonest to you, but you can find value in things that aren't, I guess, as mundane or cliche as truth, honesty, etc. You can find value in eating French fries on a Saturday, if that makes sense. Your values don't have to be exactly tied straight to your morals. Because at the end of the day, when you try to tie so much to your morals and your moral existence, I feel like the work that you do can end up being a lot less fulfilling because you're trying to tie everything back to who you are at your core. And I know she was trying to say, don't distance work in your life, but at the same time, try not to make work your only value or working to be the only thing that you're about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would add to that, when I said to not separate it, sometimes people, I always give some of my clients this activity, that they wrestle with, and I remember doing this in business school, so it's funny of executives wrestling with naming their values, um, and they have a hard time. We have a hard time, and they'll say, "What do you want, my professional values or my personal values?" Like, yes. Your values are your values. What matters to you? What matters to you in the boardroom matters to you in the McDonald's drive-through. To be silly, but you get the idea, right? And so, some examples I can share my own. I can't speak for anyone else. Again, joy is something that matters to me, and I've worked really hard in my life to get to that place to understand what that means for me. And it's important when we think about values, not to just pick the word. Oh, that sounds good to me. You got to take 2 steps beyond that. So once I think I know what the words are, then define them. So what does joy mean to me? To me, what's my personal definition? And then what does it look like in action for me and for others? So again, going back to the where do you get frustrated, where do you get annoyed, angered, what would those values be? And then how you define it, and how do you know it when you see it, when you feel it?
So I can tell you what I do when I get engaged on a new project or work with people who don't know me so well. It's super awkward, but I love it. So I say, look, I'm going to tell you what my values are. And the reason why I'm going to tell you what my values are is because I want you to not only know about me, but in case there's any type of ambiguity in terms of how you're going to understand how I work, you can always rely on the values as keys to understand what I'm doing and what I'm saying and how I'm being. And I say, these are my 4 values. 1, I believe in and I also say, these are mine, meaning like I don't expect them on you, but if you know how I am, then like it'll help us to figure out how we could be together. I said, 1, I'm radically transparent. And what I mean by radically transparent is I don't like to leave things up to ambiguity. Like I'm not going to like say one thing and believe another or think another. And I'm not going to hold my tongue if I need to say something so you understand from where I'm coming and where I want to go and what we're doing together. So radical transparency is the first one. The second is I'm extremely loyal. And what I mean by extremely loyal is that if other opportunities arise, it doesn't mean I'm not going to take them, but it does mean I'm going to tell you and we're going to talk this out, right? Because once I've committed to you, then I'm committed to you. I expect the same. That being said, my third value is I am flexible, which means I may be committed to you, but I'm not committed to the process that we've engaged in, right? So if something that like we're doing isn't working, then we're going to find a different way to achieve our goals. I'm not going to be stuck in that because flexibility is really important. And then the third thing, or the fourth thing, is I believe in hard work. Like I'm an extremely hard worker. And I say, like, I'm not tooting my horn. Like, that's not why I'm telling you this. What I am telling you this is, um, if you ask me, what are all the other things that I'm doing? I do not want to hear from you. How can you do all those things? You must be like either skimping on me or skimping on someone else because I'm not. I'm loyal and I'm committed to you and I'm radically transparent. So you have to see that if I do other things, it's because I am such a hard worker. I'm not expecting you to work as hard as me, but don't tell me that I'm not working as hard as I am because that's a value to me. Like that's really almost like aggressive, but it like tells you exactly how I'm showing up. Right? And I think it's actually really helpful because I've been in situations where people ask me questions. I'm like, what are my 4 values? And they're like, oh, okay, fine. It's not a problem. Right? Like it works.
If there are no more questions, anyone else? Oh, we have more questions. Okay.
They're like, oh, wait, tell me more about this awkward.
So I was wondering, besides just thinking about what your values are, is there anything else that you all would recommend in terms of like that intimate time that you take with yourself in order to reflect in your life and realize if you're actually burnt out, like earlier you guys brought up the example of doom scrolling. So if you're doing it to avoid, if you're doing it because you're bored, or if you're doing it because you're actually burnt out, but what are kind of questions you can ask yourself besides the values part as to what is actually going on with you?
We skipped over this part that we had thought about we would cover. So there's pre-burnout and there's post-burnout. A lot of people come to me at the point of post-burnout. In addition to questions you can ask and thinking about values, it's really important to double down on self-care. And it's important to know what that means for you, not the billion-dollar industry that says to go do this, that, and the other. For some people, it might be getting your nails done. For some people, it might be taking a bath. For some people, like, what are the things that actually help you rest, recharge, feel like you're more grounded again, that you can hear that voice clearly and to have a conversation with yourself. So it's really important post burnout to double down on self care, and pre burnout to have a self care plan. Again, we work for companies that have all kind of plans, mission, vision, values. We don't do that for ourselves. What's our self care plan? How can we be intentional about taking care of ourselves? You know, I mean, with my therapist every other week, or I go get my nails done once a month, or whatever is the things that feed your spirit and help you feel centered. Have a plan for doing that. Don't model corporate America where that's the first thing to go, right? Professional development and the things that take care of us are the first thing to go. Make that be a priority for yourself.
Um, Make friends, right? Self-care is really important, but so is caring for other people, and being cared for by other people. So sometimes we think that like I need to like deal with me now, or I got work and I don't have time for social. But like there's nothing that's like more like lifting than caring for someone and being cared in kind. So like making a friend will allow you to like feel supported in times of need, have an ear that like you can that will listen to you, and you can practice those skills not for the sake of practice, but for the sake of just becoming a more fully developed human being. Um, like that will fill your cup like as much as like more than almost anything else. You don't have to have a lot of them, but the ones you have should be really good.
I think in terms of identifying burnout, just understanding the difference between when you're unhappy doing something versus when you're actually truly burnt out of doing something. And for me, I define burnout as doing something that I am not fulfilled in, I am not happy in, and that I don't have any purpose or intention behind doing. Because you can be unfulfilled in a moment, but you still have purpose in what you're doing. So when you lose that purpose is when you can start to say, okay, maybe I'm a little bit burnt out. Maybe I need to take a break or reevaluate what I'm doing, and maybe I need to go somewhere else.
Okay, last question.
Well, thank you. My question is around the post-burnout stage. I am in like a cycle of not trusting that the next thing will be good because the last professional step that I took was disappointing, broke my heart. And so I'm like having a hard time even applying to the next thing because it's just in that I'm in that cycle where it's gonna be the same, and please help me.
Yeah. So the first things that come to mind are one is our brain starts to tell that story, right? And we reinforce it and the fear and all that gets going. So that's one thing. One thing is to also know that there is reality that we just keep repeating the same kind of things in different places. We just kind of move to a different seat. If we skip that self-reflection step, we've got to get really clear at this phase of my life, who I am now, what does really matter to me, both in, the things I want to do in a job, again, values, what my strengths are. Lots of people are working in jobs where they are fighting their weaknesses every day, not using their strengths. So knowing what your strengths are, reflecting on previous roles, what did I enjoy doing? What energized me? What drained me? What was missing? Both the job itself, the leadership, and the culture. So reflecting on all those things, I have clients create a rubric for themselves because it's hard to keep all of that in our heads. Create a rubric for yourself. And then when you're exploring job possibilities, job descriptions, whatever it might be, whichever stage you're at, where's the alignment? Where can I get 80% of what this matters to me on this rubric to the best of your knowledge? Now, if they bait and switch you, you can't do anything about that but leave quickly. So that would be my off the top of my head advice.
My 2 cents would just to be, again, what Ira said earlier would be to get comfortable in uncomfortable situations. Constantly put yourself in uncomfortable situations. You don't have to start with applying to other jobs. You can start with something else that makes you uncomfortable, like doing karaoke. Like before this weekend, I did karaoke and I was extremely uncomfortable, but it was practice for this. It was nice. I got to, if I can get up in front of a stage drunk, then I can go out here and do this and talk in a professional setting. So again, consistently being uncomfortable will make you more confident in other places and other areas of your life.
I'll just add one more thing. So a lot of times when we think about the decisions that we're making, whether they're in the moment or like projecting decisions, we got to think about like where those decisions are coming from, like almost like neuroscientifically. So like you want to think about like the pattern recognition phase to it, meaning like, are you reasoning by analogy and just assuming like the patterns that happened are going to be the patterns that will happen? And the emotional triggering and emotional tagging. Like, so if you think about it, every thought that you have, like actually has some sort of like emotional valence to it. Like some thoughts make you happy, some thoughts make you sad. Doesn't speak to their truth value, but like, like how thoughts make you feel. Like we're an embodied being, like we're not like there's no, that dichotomy of mind body is Cartesian and annoying, right? So once you realize that like we might be constrained by how we're patterning data to come up to a vision and how that vision makes us feel, you can start breaking those bonds. Like, is the pattern real? Can I see this differently? Does the vision make me feel a certain way? Do I have to feel that way? Right? But once you start breaking those things out, then you give yourself space and ability to see things differently and to feel differently about what you see. Right? But that takes work. Yeah.
I'm gonna add one last thing, make a plug for Yabi and Farine here. So as alumni, for those of you that are having career questions, searching, figuring out next things, there I think are like 20 career coaches now that you can go to on the alumni side, and everyone offers kind of a different thing, a different focus. You can you can meet with as many of them as you want to for an initial session to decide who you want to work with, and then they all give a discounted rate, myself included. Don't be afraid to use resources. You don't have to do this yourself. You don't have to figure it out alone. If you need someone for support, get the support you need. And the Emory Alumni Association offers you that, professional coaches to support you.
What a great session. Could I get a round of applause for our panelists? Thank you. So does everyone have that piece of paper that we wrote our stresses on at the beginning of the session? So we have our worries on this piece of paper. So I want you all to make a mental and physical decision to just let it go. So I'm going to ball up my piece of paper and just let it go. So whenever you're ready, feel free to let go of your worries. Thank you so much for being here. If you want additional information about our panelists, the QR codes will lead you to their LinkedIn pages. And before you all go, we have a few gifts for you all as a thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh.
There you go. Yeah, let's do a photo.
Is that helpful?
It's funny because I now work
I want to get one with the, hold on.
You want to do a group picture over there?
It's like to the point, right?
What do you love and why do you want?
You get to do that.
Amari, can you guys go down in front of your picture? Claudia?
Can you do that again?
Okay.
Right here? Go ahead. Can you do that again? Oh, thanks. There you go. Go there.
All right. Let them get in on time. You two go. Go on. Okay. Everybody pick them, okay? I'm making this there.
3, 2.
Okay, let me get just the three of y'all again.
Okay, so I'll see it on there. I'll make sure you guys get it. Okay, and then I'll send you a number. There's like 18.
I'm Mari.
Yeah, this is the executive session.
Really? When you register, so I'll make sure.
Oh, yeah.
I picked you. Choose between a blanket or a lunchbox. I did. She won. Amal. And then Camille. There he is. Huh? Lunchbox? Okay. I'm gonna get you one. Actually. You are our other raffle winner. Here we go. I wasn't able to say it's a blanket.
Oh my.
There's more food if anyone's ready. Who wants to go? Thank you. It was helpful though. I would